Good afternoon, good day, good morning, whatever it is. We're doing an oral history in Umatilla, Florida. My name is John Jackson, and I'm going to be talking to my friend.
Steve Glover.
So, Steve, you probably realize that the Florida Citrus Hall of Fame has two missions, and one is to recognize people who've made significant contribution to the industry, but the other one, and one that I really like, is that we are selling the story of Florida's citrus industry, and one way that we do it is through oral histories. So we talk to people and just have a conversation, and we uncover all kinds of interesting facts. And today, we're going to talk to you, and you were in a different industry than our previous interviewee. So give me a little family history about Steve Glover. How did you get involved in the industry? Was your family involved in the industry, or how'd you get started?
I guess my father worked for Minute Maid in the mid-50s. And so I grew up in Winter Garden, fired groves on cold nights, all these various things, was surrounded by packing houses everywhere and citrus everywhere. Actually worked for an old landscaping old gentleman that owned some citrus groves, and at 16, my friend and I, during the summer, we'd have to go hoe his orange groves and fertilize them. I remember going and getting fertilizer back then in the back of his old pickup in 200-pound croaker sacks. And we would drive. We played football at the time, so that was good exercise. I wouldn't want to do it now.
No.
But no, that was the extent of where I came from.
Well, in Winter Garden, you couldn't escape citrus. It was everywhere from Pound's Motor Company to Winter Garden Citrus Products to Winter Garden Cooperative to Dan McKinnon to the Ropers. It was all over. It was Winter Garden.
It was.
And I'm sure every boy that you went to high school with either hoed trees, lit heaters, worked in the grove at one time or another.
And on Thanksgiving and Christmas holidays, everybody, all the packing houses everywhere, shipped, and I mean had an intense week of shipping. And again, I worked loading rail cars and large semis till 11 o'clock at night. They would let us go till 11 o'clock at night. But so yes, I've been around it. I grew up about a mile, less than a mile from the Winter Garden Citrus Products, but you were surrounded by it. I used to, as a kid, would go back into within a quarter of a mile from my house and take my bow and go rabbit hunting, in the orange groves. And so, no, grew up in it. I did not have any formal education in citrus. It was in management. My father in the World War II was a machinist mate, head machinist, ran the engines in PT boats, 1,500 horsepower Allison aircraft engines. And then on the way back, he ran large diesels on the LSTs, the 400-foot long flat bottoms that carried tanks. So he had a good mechanical background. I grew up with that. Had to learn to work on vehicles. Fussed about it growing up. I'm thankful for that, what I learned from.
I heard from a friend of ours, Mike Litvin. He said,
Oh, yeah.
If you were growing up and you didn't know how to fix a car, what were you called? A pedestrian.
Yes, that's exactly right. That is exactly right.
So if you couldn't fix it, it was stuck in the driveway.
It was stuck, yeah. But that said, management, having that background, I went into, at 20 years old, I opened and managed 2 auto parts stores in Orlando. Busy, I was fine. not busy, I was like a caged animal, pacing back and forth, wanted to be outside. So one day, I was divorced. I just decided, and I walked in to meet with Bill Matthews at Winter Garden CGA. And here, what a wonderful teacher and very good, tolerant man for a divorcee. Phenomenal guy. Where I first met John, I got the job with Bill running all the irrigation, bug checking from one end to the other. He taught me all of these things, and he was so great at answering the questions that you ask thoroughly, not just short. And so I learned, and that goes back from the other two important people that were in my life were my mother and my father. They both taught me, you know, to be honest, but also to be inquisitive and to learn and want to do as best you could. And so I walked in and Bill taught me these things, and he saw that I was very inquisitive, and he allowed me to not only do all this irrigation, and we were in several counties, you know, Lake, Orange, Marion, Osceola County. But at the time...
Now, excuse me, this is when Bill was with Winter Garden CGA.
Winter Garden CGA.
Before he was with Plymouth.
Yes, he had been with Plymouth. He had
Right.
come from Plymouth. But this would have been in the early 70s, probably 71. And at the time, you didn't really have the satellite thermography. They were developing it. And we had several different thermometer stations set up throughout the cone of environment from the Lake Apopka. You had cold areas, but you also had this temperate area that was within that cone of the lake on a calm, cold night. And NASA flew over at a certain time. I had to be at that point, and then read that thermometer, and then move to the next one, and then at that point, and then all the way down to what would be almost to 192 in various places. And that was done, and they calibrated the thermography.
While you were doing that, I was in a Ford Victoria with George Howard out on the Gotha Road with a blue light on the car, and there was a graduate student on Highway 27 with the blue light, and George had a semi-truck anyway, but we'd run the blue lights, and they'd fly the thermal flights, and you're getting ground truth data, and we're flying the flights until the highway patrolman stopped the grad student and told him it was illegal to have a blue light.
Yeah.
And he managed to get through there, and we had to get special permission to use those for the planes to fly. So,
yeah.
So you were essential in collecting data that showed the impact of Lake Apopka on cold nights.
Yeah, and that cone later on, when we started doing mapping, quick decline tristeza, and you could see the influence. There was a lot of sour orange in that area, because even though you were in a warmer area, as you sloped down towards Disney, it was cold too, on cold, radiant nights. You could see the influence earlier on the quick decline tristeza, and I remember mapping that we mapped every acre down in that area, and driving along, and 6 months later, I can remember blocks that were half Clio and half sour. 6 months later, you'd walk up to the edge and there'd be a half a dozen trees left on the sour side, and there was, no problems on the Clio side. But I mean, you could see them. They looked like they'd been hit by lightning.
And you know, Steve, you know what's one of the most popular rootstocks now?
Oh, I know.
If someone said, think I'm going to plant sour. I saw those trees. I flew over those trees with Steve Garnsey and
I
Chris
remember
Blanton
Steve.
taking pictures and so forth.
Oh, crazy Chris and his Piper.
So, well, first of all, we talk about people. Bill Matthews had to be a fantastic mentor, and the thing that always amazed me about Bill was that he would ask me a question or something, and as if I was the source of all knowledge,
Yeah.
and I couldn't even hold a candle to him, and he probably treated you the same way, and you always felt kind of humble around Bill. What do you mean you're asking me? You're the guru, but he never came across like that.
Oh,
He always
no,
came across
100%
as
correct. I mean,
just a humble guy.
the one thing that used to tickle me though was back then, all the fruit buyers and the production managers throughout this area didn't have four-wheel drive vehicles. They had cars, and back then they were big cars.
Crown Victorias.
Oh yeah, and they would, in about a year's time, they looked like they had been through demolition derbies. They were beat to hell and back. And Bill would say, "Come on, ride with me. We're going to look at this, and we want to do all this." And he said, "I promise we won't get stuck." We would get stuck.
And
we'd have to.
You weren't going to call anybody. You'd dig
Oh,
yourself
no,
out.
we'd just have to dig it out.
The last thing you wanted to do was be on that radio and have someone to come.
Oh
pull
no,
you
everybody heard you.
Yeah.
And that radio, everybody back then. It was not specific. It was to everybody, and even other people found out later, several winters later, that Benny McLean and all was on the same radio frequency. So met them one night on one cold night. But we also had a lot of wind machines in that area because of the varying temperatures, elevations. And you set up the tower with the thermocouples on it, and it was amazing for me, to be in my early 20s, to see the difference. But you had that was a power pole that had a 5-foot elevation, then every 10 foot up to 40 feet, I think it was, maybe 50 feet. But every 10 foot, you could rotate a dial and see what the temperature was at that time. And you could see it be 27 degrees at 5 foot. It may be 48 or 40 degrees up high.
Good inversion. Yeah.
It was a very good inversion, and you could fire those things up, and in 30 minutes, you could see a difference. And the one thing, even though I learned with many wind machines and put in many later with my following employer, was one was good for about 9 to 10 acres. When you put 4 and 5 together, they worked so complementary that they would may really protect 100 acres. It was so much. So it was kind of interesting.
High acres had their share of them.
Oh, had their share of them. Yes.
So you were with Mr. Matthews, and you got your feet wet and learned. Now, where'd you go from there? Did you go to McKinnon?
No, from there, I went from the bug checking. I got, in a couple of years, I was given a supervisory role, and I actually had herbiciding, fertilizer, a couple of fertilizers, because we at the time had our own little fertilizer plant, and we fertilized probably 10 months out of the year, constantly rotating around, and hand crews and various other things. And I did that for several more years, and in 1978, I had an opportunity. There was a company out of Winter Garden, 2 real estate moguls had done extremely well in the real estate business. They went from 40 acres to over 2,000 acres of very good citrus in 6 months. Did some exchanges and wound up with one of them was a grove that had been A. Duda and Sons just south of Leesburg and just south of Frank Boyce's barn, So I got to visit our friend there, you know, all the time. But again, I did quite well, learned a lot. Having come from a situation where I knew the herbiciding, all these other things, and knew the calibration quite well, I wound up with, you know, a small, what was it, 957, and then 3 9100 FMC, because we grew a lot of our growth for fruit was for fresh. And so, not really knowing a whole lot about spraying, I was going to find out and learn how to do it and do it right. Well, I was also blessed by, in Ocoee at the time, FMC had built their plant where they built these, and I got to know a lot of the engineers there.
The speed sprayer.
Yeah, as a speed sprayers.
These were FMC speed sprayers.
Yeah, and those engineers kind of tolerated me and took me under their wing, and I'd want to do this, and they said, no, that won't work. You know, we've tried it, Steve, it won't work. Well, I'd have to do it anyway, but they were right, it wouldn't work. But long story short, that progressed from that. I was putting fruit into, predominantly, was selling it outright, but put a lot of it into outdoor growers at the time. What happened? Everything, I mean, these were high producing grows, very good, nice producing grows, beautiful grows. And I remember Mr. Seabrook said about 82, I think I recalled it as being 1981, when the freeze hit that was a true terrible radiant freeze, that the groves that we had off of Highway 27, and then I had one down at O'Brien in 27. That grove was one of the few groves that had microjet in it. And I fired up my pumps and had it going, and at midnight, it was 17.5 degrees. So I had my foreman say, I said, put another thermometer there. Well, he did, and I come back and it was 17 degrees, you know, and the new thermometer. It wound up being 14.5 right there.
Not good for the crop.
Not good. But that year, it had been cold, cold, cold. They were bumped down and they were locked up pretty tight. So they were certainly hurt, but they were not killed. And the other half of the acreage that we had was about 1,000 acres south of Clearmont down in the Green Swamp area. Well, that one averaged about 12 degrees, you know, across the board. And we had a few blocks that survived, were hurt, but we were able to recoup. And again, they were talking about the gentleman that was trying to buy the products. That was Dr. Gills, I believe. He was the inventor, basically, of the radiokeratotomy and making a fortune. And that's where I also met Steve Farr for the first time. He worked for Dr. Gill at the time. You know, and Steve wound up being, you know, with Ben Hill.
Ben Hill, yeah.
Yeah. And, but no, it was okay. Well, I worked with them until they were able to sell these properties. And then I got this call from Outdoor Growers and Bob Blair. And I had been putting fruit in, and so he offered me a job as a production manager, you know. And so went to work with them in February of 1982. And we worked, and their grove care had been haphazard. I mean, they had a lot of equipment, had a lot of employees, but they had no one really running it. And
I guess when Jimmy Cooper left, everything kind of...
Yeah, but, and it was, they were just jumping around from here to there to everywhere and never, you know, getting anything accomplished. And so when I got there, I remember, I rode for 3 weeks. And I said, I'm going to learn these things, and I'm going to watch and learn. And pretty soon I called everyone into our big warehouse right next to my office, and I said, you know, great place. And I said, we've got some good employees and we've got some bad ones. And I said, I'm going to tell you, I'm going to make this a good place to work for the good employees. And he said, the bad ones? I said, the bad ones, you aren't going to be here long enough to worry about it. And I said, you've got 1 week. And in 1 week, I went from almost, 49 people to 25. And the ones that were remaining thanked me. They said, these guys were in the way. And what it did was it allowed me to turn a loser into a profitable thing. And so I was able to get them a raise. I set up a bonus program so that they got things accomplished. I was always one that would really never ask anybody to do anything that I wouldn't do. But by the same token, there was very few things that I wouldn't do. And that meant I expect you to do your job, you know, and had little tolerance for otherwise. So in no time, you know, at the time, I guess you would call it my counterparts, we had John High and Dixie. They were both very gracious and tolerant of a 31-year-old whippersnapper.
Newbie, huh?
Yeah, newbie. But they were very good. We did extremely well. They were always helpful if I ever asked, but me being dumb and too proud to do, didn't normally ask too much, you know, but should have more so. But they were gracious people, good guys,
Well,
very
Steve,
smart.
it was always fascinating to me that there were no secrets. You had
No.
you had no quote insight. So if you had a problem, they didn't mind sharing.
They
at
didn't
all.
mind,
Yeah,
no.
Steve, I've been through that. Let me tell you.
That's exactly.
You might not want to try that because I didn't have much success. But if you try this, it worked out a lot better. Yeah.
I'll get back to that. I'll tell you, I said that many times to other people later on. I said, you don't want to do that. I've done that. You don't want to do that.
I've already made that mistake.
Yeah, but and so I was always one that pushed forward and trying different things, various things, and trying to attain the best that we could. But I got to, in this area, I got to learn and know a lot of different people. I got to know the Eichelberger people. I got to know the Igos. I got to know all these various people in this area. Great people, good growers. And so throughout my life, I was so blessed to have this. And back to another one in Winter Garden, that was in my life, that was a person. When I was still at Winter Garden CGA, because I worked on stuff all the time, I had this equipment, and I wasn't going to wait for a mechanic to come fix some little something. I was going to fix it and then go on. Well, I was always up at Pounds Motor Company. Well, Mr. Pounds understood, and he got to know that I liked equipment and liked building stuff and liked trying different things. And it got to the point when he was always innovating something, he'd pull up to my truck in his little golf cart, and he said, Steve, come on. And we'd go to the back lot. He said, I want to show you something. And he would do that. And so I was lucky to have been given that. You know, these gentlemen shared their expertise with me throughout that. And now we'll step back into Mount Dora. But at Mount Dora Growers, here we were. I mean, we had great production. I remember, what was it? We had a lot of groves out in Lake Norris area. And I know John knows that area pretty well. But beautiful, good area. Good, but very cold. On the night of the December 83 freeze, that day, I was actually in the process of building on to my wife's and I's first house in a t-shirt. later that night, it got cold, and the next morning, up at before daybreak at Lake Norris, it was 12 degrees in places, and so I thought, this is not good. But again, surprisingly, we had hundreds of acres that survived. I had learned from an elderly gentleman about using dipotassium phosphate and inferring cold protection to things. And so I actually had Jan Potter fly on, I had 500 gallons on hand, and he flew 2.5 gallons per acre on, and I remember him flying over me the day of the freeze, and the wind was blowing so hard that he was going sideways, as he came over me. But where I got this covered, the trees, even on rough lemon, survived, and everything around it off of Dewey Robbins Road was dead. But there was a 200-acre block, and that one survived. It was hurt, but it came back with fruit next year. And it just created a situation, the high potassium, so it would not, isonucleation couldn't occur. And so, again, here we were. I was doing well, 31-year-old on cloud nine, and I had the world by the horns, I was on top of well, it changed overnight. And so I remember having a conversation with Bob Blair. We had that packing house and ran a lot of fruit through it, many cartons. Had breakfast one morning, and he said, it cost us $300,000 overhead for this thing to sit here, and we were going to go buy fruit. So I wound up going out with him throughout the state, buying fruit for the next season. And so I would start at 6 o'clock in the morning, get my foremans going, trying to repair. We were running, a little later on, picking crews. I was running 5 front-end loaders and all these various things.
Chainsaws.
Huh?
And chainsaws.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I had, I think, 26, 27 chainsaws, and we were constantly going through them, which we found Echo was the best ones at the time. And, but long story short, we went through this, and I would leave at, 6:30, 7 o'clock, and we'd head south buying fruit all over the state. And then I'd have a short reprieve that I would get to stay around, and then we started harvesting. So I had to go up and down the state overseeing harvesting. And I was lucky in the fact that I was either up and down the 27 all the way down to about Lake Placid, or over on the West Coast. And long story short, we went through that. I went through that for several years. At the time, we could not replant anything because of the, quote, canker situation, so you couldn't get any trees to replant. We were working through a lot of various things and going through this. We bought some more fruit. Everything was fine. Then we had the 85 freeze, and that was no fun. We went from about, after the 83 freeze, we had about 1,200 acres that had survived and was tolerable. After the 85 freeze, we were down to about 700, that was surviving. And but by then, we were able to start replanting, and a few growers had some money. So at the time, we used the USDA had a thing that they would design irrigation systems for us, and they designed irrigation systems, and we figured out and bought all the materials, laid it out, and would go and rent a trencher, and we'd put in, 40, 50 acres a day with that one rented trencher, and we started replanting this. And after a short, it was about 1988, finally, it was going, didn't see a whole lot of promise in the Grove Care side, and it was, even though I thought the world of the people there at Mount Dora and Bob and everything else, it was such that I needed to look otherwise. And McKinnon out of Winter Garden, who was always to me, was known throughout the industry in that area for sure as the epitome of
He was a premier grower, wasn't he?
He was a premier grower.
His trees didn't suffer for anything.
Nothing. And I never will forget, but he was very, straightforward. I mean, when he first started hedging, we had our own 2 hedgers. The 4th gentleman, when he finally got away from this, when he first started hedging, he'd have somebody go out and stake the center of that row because he wanted it straight. He could not tolerate anything. He had a micrometer eyes, he could not tolerate anything that was not straight. But someone asked me one time, said, how do you work for that gentleman? I said, he's the easiest person in the world.
You do it right?
Do it right? And I said, I'll bring this up. We were doing some stuff later on, but we planted hundreds of acres in Lake and Orange County, and had, each 80-acre block had about 15,000 trees in it. I recall that because my son at 14 in the summer started working, and he started working with an older black gentleman, and they finally come in after a week and said, well, we're done with this one. And I said, okay, you got this one.
There was always another one.
Another one, yeah. And the older black gentleman was about 78, tall black gentleman, and his last name was Glover too. So my son called him Glover, Uncle Grant, And so he inherited him. And we were also taking us. They had already just planted the first grove in the Immokalee area. It was about a year old when I went to work with them. Not even a year old. It was 11 months. And we took it over, and it was net 550 acres on the south side of Immokalee. But at 16 months old, we averaged 3/4 of a box per tree and packed it, and did quite well with that. And the next year we took another acreage in Felda and took another section, cleared it. It was pasture. That one had been pasture, and had been actually farmed a little bit because it had several old iron wells on it we had to case. But that one we took a section a year, cleared it, developed it, and I told somebody, I said, after the freezes, I bought fruit all over the state, and I had to deal with a lot of people's problems and throughout the times, and I said, I'm going to create some of my own now. And so on that second one, when we were getting ready, we had the trees planted, everything, or we had it staked out, ready to go. And Maury Boyd was Mr. McKinnon's
stepson-in-law.
Stepson. And very sharp individual, and he and I got along great. We developed that stuff south, and we decided we were going to make sure we put in radiuses in the roads so that we didn't put trucks in the ditches at night, like had happened to me in Fort Pierce and places like that. But we have them down there, and I'd come in and I made my radius and took these stakes out. Mr. McKinnon come back down and he'd spend hours with me, and we'd put these stakes back in because he wanted more trees, And so we'd go along, do all kind of stuff like that, and he'd leave and I'd pull them back out, Well, a week later he came back down and we started putting these stakes in, and he looked at me, he said, Steve, he said, you're pulling them damn stakes out when I leave, aren't you? I said, yes, sir. Yes, sir.
You haven't run off a ditch and fell. There are not many ditches in
Well, that was it. He said, you're right. I know. He said, I just have to try. But I never will forget, he was fantastic. The other thing that and everybody fussed about him being so tough, his driveway, we had a nice, beautiful little 10-acre block that was his driveway. That was about half a mile long back into the woods where his house was down on Johns Lake. Well, we mowed that thing all the time because he wanted it kept clean, you know. So we were doing a lot of chem mowing at the time. Well, we got a little late in the summer, and you know, grass, Bermuda especially, when it transitions, it doesn't like it. Well, we went from, I mean, it didn't start growing until March of next year, you know, along his driveway, and he had to drive by that every day. And all he said was, Steve, said, let's don't do that next time. I said, well, I can tell you, if we had to mow it every day, we were not going to do that next time. But we bought and put in a lot of wind machines. And at the time, the wind machines that were being placed were were from out of Winter Haven.
Killebrews.
Yeah. And just before they closed down, I talked to the gentleman down there that ran their shop. And he built me 2 of the bases and told me the various things that I needed to do, that you needed to be 8 by 8, and it needed to be like 7.5, 8, I think it was almost 8 cubic yards of concrete. And it was 3 feet deep, and it had rebar, and it was laced in, and it was crisscrossed, and how to do it. So I put in the first one, and we did that, and made some frames, set up the first few wind machines. We did several more. And at the time, the Becks were interested in wind machines. And so they came over, and I went and taught them about what we had learned about putting in these wind machines. And they put in, gosh, 20 or 25, I bet you, throughout the state.
See, these are concrete pads. That
These were big concrete
pads of wind machines set
Yeah,
on.
yeah.
Because it wasn't a little tiny deal.
No, it was 38 foot tall, had a 17-foot diameter rotor that was turning an average of 590 RPMs on that rotor. And that was when it was driven by, I'm giving you the numbers because everybody drove those with either Chrysler industrial V8s or Ford 6-cylinder industrials, and they would just suck up gas, and they were a pain in the butt. Well, I had a 6-cylinder Deutsch, and it was enough, and you needed 90 horsepower input, and these are rated at about 88 horsepower. So I called, in putting in down south and putting in a lot of pumps, I talked to Deutsch engineers in Atlanta quite a bit. And so I called and talked to them again. I said, well, you know, I need to have this thing, it's rated at 2350, but I need to turn it 2550. And he said, no problem. He said, you can turn it up, and told me how to turn it up. He said, just watch it when it's under full load. He said, if it's not black smoking, it won't hurt it. He said, we run that same engine in trucks in Germany, 2900. He said, you won't hurt it. So long story short, we hooked that up to that thing. We put it in gear, and a Deutsch, when it's young and idling, it rump, rump, rump. Well, you put that big prop in gear, and all of a sudden, you learn to really quick load it up because it would rump, rump, and I thought we were going to shake this thing apart before we get it revved up. Well, we figured that out, but that thing would run from midnight till dawn on about 9 gallons of fuel. Just unbelievable on what it was, and it didn't bother you. It would crank, but you learn all these various things. And so we went, and after the freezes, I remember the 1989 freeze. We had planted all kinds of acreage up here, and we were able to protect it. But I had one block that we had not, we had big wells that we ran electric motors on, but we also had sliding so that we could had an input that we had 250 horsepower Cummins diesels driving it for coal, and we had those running, and we had everything, and sometimes we had main lines connected so we could bring them together and equalize them up. But we had a situation where, as we got into Lake County, we had 40 acres of an 80-acre block of sunburst tangerines that had to be turned off. And they were at about, they were almost 3 years old at the time. Very good, nice groves. And we brought in a crew and banked those trees because it was going to be so devastating. Where I had the water running, I mean, from me to, 20 feet away across the dividing line, they came back with fruit. On the other side that we had banked, we had to cut them all off ankle high and regrow them. We regrew them from there up. Across the road, we had another 15,000 that we had to regrow like that again. And, but Mr. McKinnon said, what do you think? I said, we'll probably get about a 70%. I think we lost about 200 out of these blocks. They had a phenomenal. Yeah.
You keep the root system there.
We had it, and they just regrew, and in the following year, we were harvesting it again. But at the time, and Mr. Seabrook will appreciate this, because at the time, because we had so much acreage down south and we had some things, we actually were picking a lot of fruit down south and bringing it up, and knew about what we needed to do, and we were mixing it in with some fruit from up in our area to salvage, And I never will forget someone saying, we salvaged 93% of our earlies after that freeze and 68% of our Valencias. And I never will forget, we watched the ratio, and I had 2 got turned down. It went below a 9, and I remember had to go take them and regrade them and bring them back out. And I said, well, I guess all that late bloom must have thrown it out. And the manager, the unloading manager, said, the damn Valencia's not helping any either, are they?
Cutting your deal. So after McKinnon, when did you get in did you go to Diamond R?
I was with McKinnon, and after my last section down there, in Felda again, about a mile south of the first one, I went eventually. It honestly, having run grove care throughout various small blocks, to have a 500, 600 acre block that was contiguous and all exactly the same became so easy. I mean, it was so easy to do. And I actually, at 40 years old, I think it was, I thought, I've learned, and it's time to go out and share. And so I did. And I actually wound up with working for Diamond R. They had been very good at the time. They were, I learned a lot. Actually, Diamond R originated out of Winter Garden. It was Bert Roper's family that was bought out in the 70s by some other gentlemen from the Fort Pierce area. And that's where I got those 200-pound croaker sacks at the old Diamond R block, but.
Now, was Randy Williams?
Randy Williams was the one that.
Was he at Diamond R?
Yes, he was the one that actually helped me get the job with. And Tom Hansen.
Hansen was there too.
Well, Tom Hansen was in charge of that, yes, and Hansen was a great guy.
See, before you came along, they were at Dixie Agrichemical up in Eustis
yes.
with George Slay.
Oh yeah.
So they got everything in.
Yeah.
So, Steve, what's going on now in the agrichemical business? I mean, are there just large companies left? Is Triangle still doing it? Diamond R still doing it? But I mean, how are they surviving? Obviously, if we've gone from producing 100 million boxes to 20 million boxes, things have gotten
Well,
pretty slim.
what happened is with, and I can speak to this because I'm actually a small stockholder in Diamond R2, but we started diversifying when we first started seeing the various entities of the greening. As a matter of fact, the greening, as far as I know, was first detected in that last grove in Felda that we developed, you know, and it was on a little leaf that showed up and was documented as to where it was, right next to Turner's stuff. So, you know, Triangle, they closed their location in Mascot, which serviced the center. Diamond R has just recently closed their location in Winter Garden. And it was because, not only that, it was so enveloped by subdivisions and such, it became actually probably dangerous to keep in that area.
Lawsuits probably put them out of business.
Well, it would have, but also the, you know, in this area, I mean, traffic was just horrible to try to go anywhere, and you didn't have the volume that you once had. And so, and then someone came along that offered $2 million more than it was worth, which made it attractive. And they've divested. They still have their location in Hastings, in Palatka, East Palatka. They have the Fort Pierce location, and they've put the money into really expanding the plant out of Okeechobee. That is a massive plant in Okeechobee with dual liquids and such as that. And then they have the Homestead location that has fertilizer. And then they have over into LaBelle. But Triangle closed theirs. They still have their location in Lake Placid, but they've diminished. But yes, it's very minimal as to, you know.
You still hang in there and have some customers and sell?
I do. I'm retired, but I am.
Yep.
Yeah, I am a commission salesman because of the customers that I had. I knew so well that I can do it from the phone. You know, I don't travel. I don't. Luckily, over the years, and I say this because of my wife, you know, everything we have, we own, and have a lot of and so we've got a lot of different things we're fine. And so we don't need anything extra, and we actually put away some money and sold some other properties, and so we're doing that. But I was, about a year ago, I finally retired because I was so tired of driving down Highway 27, and you get to Lake Wales, and what used to take you a little over an hour to get to Lake Wales take you 2.5 hours. And I mean,
so now you're a recluse in Weirsdale?
No, in Montverde.
You live in
I live on the lake in Montverde, you know, I live on the point in Montverde, right across from the academy. I look up every morning at the academy.
I thought you were in Weirsdale.
We own the property in Weirsdale.
Oh, I got confused. Okay.
Yeah. No, and
so you're by Pine Island and Gordon Neck Springs and that?
Well, yeah, actually there's a Lake Florence is a little lake that's off of Lake Apopka. It's not in Lake Apopka. It's about a 300-acre lake, and it sits about a mile from Lake Apopka, and we live on that lake. So.
Yeah, well, you've got a lot of high-class residents down there on Pine Island, right?
Oh yeah, Bella Colina. Yeah, I can tell you. I remember when they were 20 years ago, I guess now. Lynn and I were working out in the yard one Saturday, and all these helicopters flying all over the place. And they said, "What?" Because it's only about 1.5 miles from where we are. And what in the world? And then we found out what it was, you know. And they were just taking people from all over the country, giving them tours.
Kind of like American agronomics, you know. We sell it from the air. I went to Bella Colina with my grandsons playing golf.
Playing golf.
I don't play golf. And I say, dadgummit, guys, this golf course doesn't look anything like it was the last time I was here. They looked at me and say, Bampa, you don't play golf. And I say, yeah, I don't, but the last time I was here, this was an orange grove.
Yep.
Just like the one down at Kings Ridge and all these others that have.
You know, that orange, when I was with Winter Garden CGA, that was the Carpenter's Orange Grove. So I remember it quite well,
Yeah.
you know, being up on that hill. But it's, no.
Things have changed.
They have changed. They have changed. I still have a friend that's a customer up in Crescent City. He's doing great up there. He has some of the few, he gets really good color from his tangos, and nobody else can get that. But,
No, yet.
But you know, the other day I talked to him. He called me and was talking to him, and I said, when we had this cool spell, and I said, well, it's probably got cool up there. And he said, yeah, it was 55 this morning. That was, you know, when we were in the 60s, high 60s, but nothing like that. But, you know, it gets cold like that, but it doesn't get devastating cold normally. You're tempered.
Well, we're gonna see an entirely different industry, obviously, and
Yeah.
when we find a solution to greening, and
Yeah.
And there are a number of different options that people are exploring, and whether you're growing it in a shade house, or whether they call it a cup or whatever
The cups,
it is,
yeah.
or whether you inject it with oxytetracycline, or whether you're putting tents over young trees, or we've talked this morning to Ed James, who is
Oh, yeah.
into cover crops and increasing the carbon content of your soil. This gives a chance for all you creative people to come up with ideas, and I'm sure you've been playing around with different things to see what
yeah.
you can do.
Well, you know, and the fact is, given a chance, and we've played around with a lot of various things, and I do think that what Ed's saying has some, I think that one thing is we're looking at what I noticed 15 years ago was when the greening hit these trees, you notice an increase in, you know, iron deficiency. And so we started increasing some iron and various things like that. But then also, we'd gotten away from using molybdenum. And when you start to think about it, that molybdenum combines with that iron to make that nitrogen reductase molecule. And what's happening is it couldn't do so, and so they were basically starving to death on a full stomach. And so we're looking at trying to alleviate some of these problems, and given a chance with the zinc that people are doing, that's an auxin that makes it start growing, you know, that'll make it start growing a bypass, you know. And so will it work? I don't know. I've got some friends up in the North Florida part. My relatives were from near that Thomasville area, and so I've gone by several of the guys that are up there, and they're beginning to get HLB showing up there. They thought they don't have it. 2 years ago they said, oh, well, we've had some cold. I said, no, you haven't had any cold yet now. You've had some cold, but not cold.
Well, we'll see. You know, I was doing a little research for my our barn we're going to do over in Walkerville, right? And I found a quote from a lady's journal that was growing citrus before the 1835 freeze in north of Jessup, Georgia.
Jessup, yep.
And she described the orange tree growing next to the house that was so big they were picking fruit out of the upstairs windows. She claimed that they picked 8,474 oranges off of a tree in Jessup, Georgia.
Well, you know,
If you can you imagine? So what has happened? 1835 freeze. All that was gone, and we went to St. Augustine. In the 94, 95 freeze, we went to Leesburg, and the 82, 83 freeze, we're now down in Fort Pierce and Immokalee, and greening comes along, and we're struggling everywhere.
I tell you.
You've seen a lot, haven't you? Just in your short little time, man.
My short time, I've seen a lot. And that's why I said every experience, good and bad, you learn from. And I I take it as a blessing because I never forget when I'd go down south to develop me. I would leave on Monday morning a lot and get home at, at 4 o'clock, and I'd get home at about 5 o'clock on Friday afternoon. I'd have to stay down there sometimes all week while I was doing this intense development. And I looked along the Caloosahatchee in all different places and could have bought anywhere, but I'd get back to I-4 and going over I-4 on 27 and looking out over the hills, and I'd look over there, and every weekend I'd look and I'd say, hell no, I'm not moving down there.
This is home.
Yeah, that's just like, nope. But no, it's, and had some very good friends down there, made some very good friends. And
well, the industry's hung in there and suffered together, but there's still enough for the next generation. They're still fighting the battle, so we'll see what happens and where it goes.
Well, and I wish that my grove that a year ago when I retired, my neighbor had bought a 10-acre grove, and he pushed it and planted it in Valencias, and it's a good area. In Wearsdale, it was 162-foot elevation, so it's a good area. And he and his wife, who were retired, they got into it and wanted to mess with it. So he said, anytime you ever sell yours, let me know. And so mine, two things. Several years back, when it got to be problematic because my son got cancer and I had to spend a lot of time taking him back and forth and didn't give it the chance that it should. But it also had a beautiful 1931 farmhouse on it, very good shape, which came with a renter, and that's a pain.
Yeah, I can identify with that.
And so when that finally, a year ago, they wanted it, and I sold it to them, and they're going to, going to push it up, and going to replant it totally. They're doing everything, 110%, so I could give them all the best.
If you're going to do it,
do it, yeah, and I'm thankful for that, and I wish them well.
Well, we're gonna close it
Yep.
for now. I appreciate it.
Yes, sir.
And we're making progress in Barberville. I've got a lady who says she's going to help me get the permit. So if you come across some old pieces of equipment that we can use over there, Mr. Seabrook gave me a gold mine of fruit knives today. Oh, phenomenal. So I'm collecting stuff like that.
There you go. I was about to say, I was going to start stealing some. My wife's got a handful of them that she uses in her kitchen, and I'm going to start stealing some from her.
Don't you dare tell her where they went.
No. Oh, man. No. She would, that little lady's 4'10", and I used to tell somebody, I said, I've been with almost 50 years, and I said, I'd rather take on 2 big linebackers than her when she's mad.
Well, I appreciate you coming
Yes,
from Mont
sir.
Verde.
I appreciate it.